The clasp of my pearl necklace felt like ice against the nape of my neck. I stood before the full-length mirror in my hotel suite, smoothing the invisible wrinkles from my navy blue mother-of-the-groom dress. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the California sun was shining with an offensive brilliance, illuminating the manicured lawns where, in exactly 3 hours, my only son would vow his life to a woman he believed was his soulmate. I leaned closer to the glass. The woman staring back at me didn't look like a vengeful monster. She looked like a 62-year-old widow, tired but well-kept, a mother who had sacrificed everything. But beneath the tailored silk and the carefully applied lipstick, my blood ran cold, humming with a quiet, lethal energy. I picked up my clutch. It was heavy, but not with tissues for happy tears or a speech about the beauty of unconditional love. Inside this small beaded bag rested a manila envelope. It contained 94 pages of bank statements, forged signatures, and a neatly drafted indictment from my attorney. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of Ethan's life. Instead, it was going to be an execution, and I was the one pulling the lever. For 30 years, I was a forensic auditor for the federal government. My job was to look at the things people tried to hide. I hunted ghosts through ledgers, tracking missing millions through labyrinthine shell companies and offshore accounts. I learned early on that people lie. Husbands lie to wives. Business partners lie to each other. Children lie to their parents. But numbers? Numbers never lie. They leave a trail, like footprints in fresh snow. If you know how to look, they will always tell you the truth. I just never thought I would have to use those skills on my own flesh and blood. Ethan was always my soft spot. After his father passed away when he was 10, it was just the two of us. I worked 60-hour weeks to make sure he had everything. Private tutors, lacrosse camps, a debt-free degree from Georgetown. He was a bright boy, but he had a fatal flaw. He was too eager to please, too trusting, too desperate for validation. When he started his venture capital firm 3 years ago, I saw the anxiety creeping into his posture, the late-night phone calls, the forced smiles, the way he stopped looking me in the eye when I asked how the quarter was going. I offered to look at his books. He always brushed me off with a laugh, saying, "Mom, leave the work at the office. I've got it under control." I wanted to believe him. Then, he brought Ava home. Ava. The name itself sounded like a sigh. She was a walking, talking Norman Rockwell painting. Blonde, petite, with a smile so bright it could blind you to the absolute void behind her eyes. She was from a small town in the Midwest, or so she said. She baked peach cobbler from scratch, wore pastel sundresses, and within 10 minutes of walking into my living room, she was calling me Mom. "Ethan has told me so much about you, Mom," she had cooed, placing a perfectly manicured hand over mine. "You're his hero. I just hope I can make him half as happy as you have." Most mothers would have melted, but I felt a strange prickle at the base of my skull. It was the same feeling I used to get sitting across from corporate embezzlers who tried to charm me with golf stories. She was too polished. Her sweetness felt rehearsed, her humility weaponized. Every time she spoke to Ethan, her voice dropped half an octave, soft and breathy, wrapping around him like a velvet noose. And Ethan? He looked at her like she was the only oxygen left in the room. He was utterly, helplessly consumed. I pushed my instincts down. I told myself I was being a cynical old woman, an overprotective mother refusing to cut the umbilical cord. I wanted Ethan to be happy, so I smiled. I ate the peach cobbler, and when they announced their engagement 6 months later, I wrote a check for $80,000 to cover the wedding of their dreams. That was my first mistake. The moment the check cleared, the dynamic shifted. It was subtle at first, the kind of psychological maneuvering that leaves you questioning your own sanity. Ava became the commander of an invisible army, and I was quietly, ruthlessly stripped of my rank. "Oh, Mom, you've worked so hard your whole life," Ava told me over brunch one Sunday, her blue eyes wide with faux concern. "Ethan and I talked, and we just want you to relax. Be a guest of honor. Don't you worry your pretty head about the details. My wedding planner and I have everything under control." She hired a boutique agency called Dream Vows LLC. Whenever I asked about the floral arrangements or the catering menu, Ava would neatly pivot the conversation, usually bringing up my health or my age. I don't want to stress you out, Mom. Remember how your blood pressure spiked last month? The doctor said you need peace. It was masterful gaslighting. She was building a narrative, to Ethan and to anyone who would listen, that I was fragile, fading, incapable of handling the complexities of a modern wedding. By the third month of planning, Ethan was stepping in to defend her. Mom, just let Ava handle it. She's stressed enough as it is. Stop interrogating her about the napkins. I wasn't interrogating her about napkins. I was asking basic questions about a $15,000 catering deposit. But I backed off. I played the role of the supportive, quiet mother-in-law until the first batch of receipts arrived. It was a Tuesday evening. I have a lifelong habit of keeping meticulous personal records. Occupational hazard. I sent a polite email to Ava, copying Ethan, simply asking for the vendor invoices so I could organize them for my tax accountant, as some of the charitable donations related to the venue could be written off. Ava didn't reply to the email. Instead, she dropped by my house unannounced the next morning, carrying a tray of iced lattes. "I brought the printouts you wanted," she chirped, dropping a thin manila folder on my kitchen island. "Though I don't know why you want to look at boring old bills. Let's talk about your dress." I waited until she left before opening the folder. Inside were 5 pages of printed PDFs. At first glance, they looked standard. A venue fee, a catering deposit, a massive line item for a customized floral arch. But as my eyes scanned the pages, that familiar prickle at the base of my skull returned, sharper this time. I walked over to my desk, put on my reading glasses, and laid the papers out under the harsh glare of my desk lamp. In the real world, invoices are messy. They have odd numbers, $14,327.45. They have itemized breakdowns, cost per stem, hourly labor rates, tax percentages. Ava's invoices were perfectly round. Catering, $20,000. Floral, $15,000. Band and entertainment, $10,000. I picked up the invoice from Dream Vows LLC. The logo at the top was slightly pixelated, as if it had been stretched from a low-resolution image found on Google. I checked the footer. There was a P.O. box address in Delaware, but no EIN, employer identification number, no state tax ID, no terms of service. It was a phantom document, a piece of paper mocked up to look like an invoice. I picked up my phone and dialed the number listed for the florist, a supposedly high-end boutique in downtown Los Angeles. "Petals and Vines, how can I help you?" a cheerful voice answered. "Hi, this is Angela Turner. I'm calling to confirm the floral arrangements for the Turner-Whitaker wedding next month. I just wanted to verify the final balance." There was a pause, the sound of keyboard clicking. "Turner-Whitaker. I'm sorry, ma'am. I don't have a wedding under that name in our system." "Are you sure?" "Ava Whitaker. The invoice is for $15,000. "Ma'am, our minimum for custom weddings is $5,000. I would definitely remember a $15,000 account. We don't have an Ava Whitaker on file." I hung up the phone. The house was dead silent, save for the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I looked down at the paper. $15,000 of my money had gone to pay for flowers that didn't exist. Where had it gone? A cold, analytical calm washed over me, pushing aside the initial wave of nausea. The mother in me wanted to call Ethan, to scream, to ask what the hell was going on. But the auditor in me took the wheel. You don't confront a suspect when you only have one piece of the puzzle. You dig. You follow the money. You build an airtight case so that when you finally drop the hammer, there is no room for denial, no room for tears, and no room for escape. I closed the blinds in my study, opened my laptop, and poured myself a black coffee. It was going to be a long night. Ava thought I was just a tired old woman she could manipulate with sweet words and blurry PDFs. She was about to find out exactly what I did for a living. Midnight arrived, draping my 4-bedroom suburban home in absolute silence. The only light in the study came from the harsh clinical glow of my dual monitors. To anyone else, it was just a quiet Tuesday night. To me, it was a crime scene. I tied my hair back, put on my reading glasses, and let my fingers hover over the keyboard. For 30 years, I tracked down phantom assets for the IRS. I dismantled tax evasion rings orchestrated by men in bespoke suits with armies of Ivy League lawyers. A 26-year-old girl in a pastel sundress who baked peach cobblers was not going to outsmart me. First rule of forensic accounting: follow the origin. When Ethan and Ava announced their engagement, I hadn't just handed them an $80,000 cashier's check. At Ethan's request, I had deposited the funds directly into an old joint checking account we had opened when he was a freshman at Georgetown. It was supposed to be a dedicated wedding fund account, so Ethan could keep the expenses separate from his venture capital firm's finances. He had promised to send me monthly statements. He never did. And lost in the flurry of cake tastings and dress fittings, I hadn't pressed him. He must have forgotten that my name was still on the account. I hadn't. I navigated to the bank's portal, entered my credentials, and bypassed the two-factor authentication that was still linked to my cell phone number. The dashboard loaded and the balance flashed across the screen in bold, indifferent font. $412.50. My breath caught in my throat. $80,000. Gone. I didn't panic. Panic is an emotion, and emotions make you sloppy. I clicked the export button and downloaded the transaction history for the past 6 months into an Excel spreadsheet. The screen filled with rows and columns of data, the DNA of Ava and Ethan's wedding. I started at the top, my eyes scanning the disbursement lines. There were the usual minor charges: a few $100s at a bridal boutique, a charge for a local bakery, a payment to a stationery company for the invitations. But these were breadcrumbs. I was looking for the lions. There they were. 3 massive wire transfers, executed over the span of 2 months. Wire transfer: Dream Vows, LLC, $15,000. Wire transfer: Dream Vows, LLC, $10,000. Wire transfer: Dream Vows, LLC, $15,000. $40,000 funneled out to a single entity. The wedding planner, Ava claimed, was handling everything to spare me the stress. I minimized the spreadsheet and opened a new browser tab, navigating straight to the Delaware Division of Corporations database. Fraudsters love Delaware. It's the easiest place in America to register a shell company and hide the identity of its true owners behind a registered agent. I typed Dream Vows LLC into the search bar and hit enter. The entity popped up. I paid the standard $20 fee with my credit card to pull the corporate formation documents. The PDF loaded on my second monitor. Date of formation: October 14th. I leaned back in my leather chair, a bitter, hollow laugh escaping my lips. October 14th. Exactly 12 days after Ethan had dropped to one knee on a beach in Malibu and slipped a 2-carat diamond onto Ava's finger. Dream Vows LLC wasn't a boutique wedding planning agency. It didn't exist before the engagement. It was a bucket, built specifically to catch my money. But who was holding the bucket? The registered agent listed on the Delaware documents was Corporate Services, Inc., a generic mail forwarding service. A dead end for an amateur. But I wasn't an amateur. I turned my attention back to the Excel spreadsheet. The wire transfers. When you send a domestic wire, you don't just send it to a name. You send it to a routing number and an account number. I clicked on the transaction details for the first $15,000 wire to Dream Vows LLC. The routing number was 9 digits long. I copied it and pasted it into the American Bankers Association routing number lookup tool. If Dream Vows LLC were a legitimate Delaware-based corporate entity, it would likely bank with a major national institution, like Chase, Bank of America, or Wells Fargo. The search result loaded: Oak Haven Community Credit Union, Oak Haven, Ohio. The ice in my veins solidified. Oak Haven, Ohio. Population 12,000. It was the quaint Midwestern hometown Ava talked about so fondly. The place where her parents supposedly still lived, where she learned to bake and quilt and be the perfect, wholesome all-American girl. Why would a high-end corporate wedding planner in Los Angeles use a tiny regional credit union in rural Ohio? They wouldn't. I needed to link the credit union account directly to Ava. I needed a slip-up. Grifters are greedy, and greed always breeds carelessness. When people have sudden influxes of cash, they get arrogant. They mix business with pleasure. I opened another tab and began digging into open-source intelligence. I searched Ava's social media footprints. Her Instagram was locked down, a perfectly curated grid of wedding countdowns and couple selfies. But she had a Venmo account. Most millennials do, and they rarely think to make their transaction histories private. I found her handle at Ava Marie Hayes. I scrolled through her public transactions over the past few months. October 20th, Ava paid redacted. Nails with the girls. November 5th, Ava paid redacted. Pre-wedding facial, December 12th, Ava paid redacted. Groceries, nothing unusual. Until I noticed a pattern. Several of the transactions she had received were from smaller local vendors in Los Angeles. Received from DJ Spark, deposit refund. Received from Rustic Bites Catering, overpayment correction. I picked up my phone and looked at the clock. It was 1:30 a.m. in California. Too late to call anyone, but I didn't need to. I had enough of the picture to see the monster hiding in the brush. Ava had convinced Ethan to wire $40,000 to Dream Vows LLC, an account she secretly controlled back in her hometown. From there, she acted as her own wedding planner. She booked the absolute cheapest options for the wedding: a DJ instead of a live band, a standard buffet instead of a plated dinner, and kept the massive difference for herself. The fake round number invoices she handed me over iced lattes were just props to keep the old lady quiet and the money flowing. She was embezzling her own wedding fund. She was stealing from me, right in front of Ethan's eyes, using a shell company and a fake smile. I sat in the dark, the blue light reflecting off my glasses. A profound, suffocating sadness washed over me. I thought about Ethan, my boy. He was working 80-hour weeks, stressed and exhausted, completely oblivious to the fact that the woman he was about to marry was systematically robbing his family. He was a victim of a classic affinity fraud, someone using love and trust to bypass all logical financial safeguards. I had to tell him. I had to show him the spreadsheet, the Delaware registry, the routing numbers. I would print it all out, lay it on his desk, and watch the illusion of Ava shatter. He would be devastated, yes, but he would be safe. I reached for the mouse to hit print, but my finger hesitated over the button. Wait. My eyes drifted back to the Excel spreadsheet, drawn to the bottom of the ledger. The $40,000 was accounted for. Another $15,000 had gone to actual, albeit cheap, vendors. That left $25,000 missing. Where did the rest of the $80,000 go? I scrolled down past the wedding expenses. There was a completely different set of outgoing wires, ones that had nothing to do with Dream Vows LLC or caterers. November 22nd, ACH transfer, Oak Tree Mortgage, $12,500. December 15th, ACH transfer, Oak Tree Mortgage, $12,500. My heart stopped. The air vanished from the room. Oak Tree Mortgage was my lender, but my house was fully paid off. I had burned the mortgage papers in the backyard fire pit with Ethan 5 years ago, celebrating our financial freedom. Why was Ethan's joint account sending $25,000 to a mortgage company under my name? The analytical detachment I had maintained all night completely evaporated. My hands began to shake violently. I clicked on the ACH details. Payment towards second mortgage/home equity line of credit. Borrower, Angela Turner. Cosigner, Ethan Turner. A second mortgage. On my house, I hadn't signed any papers. I hadn't stepped foot in a bank. To take out a second mortgage, you need original signatures. You need a notary. You need the homeowner. Ava was a grifter, yes. She had stolen $40,000 for her own pockets. But Ava couldn't forge my signature on a federal bank loan application and get it past a notary. Only one person had access to my old financial records, my social security number, and a notary at his venture capital firm who would stamp anything without asking questions. Only one person. I stared at the name on the screen. Co-signer, Ethan Turner. The room spun. The walls of my safe, quiet suburban study felt like they were collapsing inward. Ava wasn't the only monster in this story. She wasn't an apex predator who had ensnared my innocent son. They were partners. My son, my flesh and blood, had forged my signature to leverage my home, and his fiancée was using the wedding as a smokescreen to launder the cash. The tears didn't come. Instead, the sadness I felt just moments ago hardened into something unrecognizable, something solid, cold and razor-sharp. They thought I was just a tired old widow they could bleed dry before shipping me off to a nursing home. I closed the laptop with a soft click. Let the games begin. I didn't sleep that night. When the sun finally crested over the California hills, painting the sky in a cheerful, ignorant pink, I was already on my third cup of black coffee. The spreadsheet on my monitor felt like a ticking time bomb. But a forensic auditor knows that a bomb is useless unless you know exactly who built it and how it's wired. Ava wasn't just a greedy bride. She was methodical, and methodical people always have a history. At 8 a.m. sharp, I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 5 years. "Marcus?" I said when the gruff voice answered on the second ring. Marcus Thorne was a former FBI investigator who had transitioned into private intelligence. We had collaborated on a massive corporate embezzlement case back in the 2000s. He owed me a favor. "Angela Turner," Marcus rumbled, sounding vaguely amused. "Tell me you're not coming out of retirement to make my life difficult." "Not officially," I replied, my voice steady. "I need a deep dive, a background check that goes all the way to the bedrock. Financials, civil litigations, sealed records if you can get them. The subject is Ava Marie Hayes, born in Oak Haven, Ohio." "Give me 48 hours, Marcus said. He didn't need 48. By Thursday evening, an encrypted file landed in my inbox. The password was a string of characters only Marcus and I would know. I downloaded the PDF, which was a staggering 60 pages long, and began to read. The all-American girl facade began to peel away, strip by ugly strip. Ava hadn't just grown up in Oak Haven, she had left a crater there. 7 years ago, at the age of 22, Ava had been married to a man named David Miller. David owned a highly successful regional chain of hardware stores. He was local royalty, beloved by the town, and 10 years her senior. I scrolled to page 14, civil court records and bankruptcy filings. 3 years into their marriage, David Miller filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. His business had been completely liquidated. But the forensic breakdown Marcus provided showed a chilling pattern. Prior to the bankruptcy, massive amounts of capital from David's business accounts had been siphoned off into consulting fees and marketing expenditures. The vendor? A generic LLC registered in Nevada. Ava had drained him dry, legally and systematically, funneling the money into untouchable accounts before filing for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. She walked away clean, holding a heavy settlement and a pristine credit score, while David was left living in a rented trailer, his reputation in ruins. She was a financial parasite, a black widow who didn't kill her mates, she just bankrupted them. And now she had her fangs sunk deeply into my son. But Ava's history of draining wealthy men didn't explain the second mortgage on my house. That required an inside man. Friday morning, I drove to the Los Angeles County Registrar Recorder / County Clerk's office. The air conditioning in the building was freezing, but I was sweating underneath my silk blouse. I requested the physical deed and the recent lien records for my property. The clerk, a tired-looking woman with heavy glasses, slid a thick manila folder across the counter. "Everything filed in the last 6 months is at the top, ma'am," she said. I walked over to a high-top viewing desk, my hands trembling slightly as I opened the folder. There it was. A deed of trust, securing a $150,000 home equity line of credit against my fully paid-off home. I flipped to the signature page. Angela M. Turner. To the untrained eye, it looked flawless. The sharp angles of the A, the sweeping cross of the T. But I am a mother, and I am an auditor. I know my own handwriting, and more importantly, I know my son's. Ethan had spent hours in high school trying to forge my signature on report cards. He always hesitated on the loop of the G, pressing the pen down just a fraction of a millimeter too hard, leaving a tiny, darker pool of ink at the base. There it was, the dark pool of ink. Next to it was the notary seal. It belonged to a man named Gregory Vance. Gregory was the in-house notary at Ethan's venture capital firm. Ethan hadn't just forged my name. He had used his authority at work to compel a subordinate to illegally stamp a fraudulent federal banking document. I closed the folder. The physical sickness hit me so hard I had to grip the edge of the table to keep from collapsing. My son, my beautiful, brilliant boy, whom I had carried, nurtured, and loved unconditionally. He had sold me out to cover a massive debt, and he was using his wedding to a grifter to launder the proceeds. By the time I drove back to my house, the grief had burned away, leaving behind a cold, terrifying clarity. I needed to look them in the eyes. I needed to see them lie to my face. I picked up my phone and texted the group chat. Ethan, Ava, can you both come over for dinner on Sunday? We need to finalize some of the larger vendor payments before the big day. I'm making roast beef. Ava replied in less than 2 minutes. We'd love to, Mom. Can't wait. Sunday evening arrived. The dining room was set perfectly. Crystal wine glasses, the good silver, the smell of rosemary and garlic wafting from the kitchen. It was the perfect stage for a slaughter. Ethan and Ava walked through the door hand in hand. Ethan looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, but Ava was radiant in a white linen dress carrying a bottle of Cabernet. Mom, Ethan said, pulling me into a hug. He felt stiff, tense. You look beautiful, Mom, Ava chimed in, kissing my cheek. She smelled of expensive vanilla and lies. We sat at the dining table. I poured the wine, keeping my hand perfectly steady. We engaged in agonizing small talk for 20 minutes. The weather, Ethan's firm, the floral arrangements. So, Ethan finally said, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. You mentioned finalizing the vendor payments? I set my wine glass down. Yes, I was looking over the invoices Ava gave me, from Dream Vows LLC. Ava's smile didn't falter, but her eyes snapped onto mine, sharp and calculating. Oh? I hope they weren't too confusing. I know modern wedding billing can be a lot to take in. Not confusing at all, I said evenly. I reached into the briefcase sitting on the chair next to me and pulled out a single, neatly printed piece of paper. I slid it across the mahogany table toward them. It's a routing number trace. It shows that Dream Vows LLC is an empty shell company. The $40,000 I wired into the joint account was transferred directly into a credit union in Oak Haven, Ohio, an account registered under the name Ava Marie Hayes. The silence in the dining room was absolute. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked, loud as a gavel. Ethan stared at the paper, his face draining of all color. He looked from the paper to Ava, his mouth opening, but no sound coming out. Ava didn't look at the paper. She looked at me. For a split second, the all-American girl vanished, replaced by a cold, reptilian predator assessing a threat. But just as quickly, the mask snapped back into place. I turned my gaze to my son. But that's not the worst part, is it, Ethan? I reached into my briefcase again and pulled out the copy of the deed of trust. I dropped it on top of the routing trace. A $150,000 second mortgage, forged, notarized by your employee, Gregory Vance. Tell me, Ethan, was the wedding just a cover to launder the loan so you could cover your firm's losses? Ethan choked on a breath. Mom, I can explain. We were drowning. The firm, one of our main investors pulled out. I was going to lose everything. Ava said what? I demanded, my voice rising, vibrating with 30 years of interrogative authority. Ava said it was okay to commit federal wire fraud and forgery against your own mother. That was when Ava made her move. She didn't scream. She didn't deny it. Instead, she let out a loud, ragged sob, covering her face with her hands. Her shoulders shook violently. Ethan, Ava cried, her voice muffled, thick with absolute devastation. She's doing it again. Oh my God, Ethan, you warned me, but I didn't think it was this bad. I froze. Doing what again? Ava looked up, her face a masterclass in theatrical grief. Tears streamed perfectly down her flushed cheeks. She reached out and grabbed Ethan's arm, clinging to him like a frightened child. Mom, please, please don't do this. We love you so much. Ethan, desperate for an escape hatch from his own guilt, seized the lifeline she threw him. He blinked, swallowing hard, and then his expression shifted from panic to a sickening, patronizing pity. Mom, Ethan said softly, slowly, the way one speaks to a dangerous animal or a mental patient. What are you talking about? You took out that mortgage. The room tilted. Excuse me? You took it out, Ethan continued, his voice steadying as he stepped fully into the lie. 3 months ago, you came to me, crying, saying you were worried about your retirement portfolio dropping. You asked me to help you set up the HELOC so you'd have liquid cash. Gregory came to the house. You signed it in front of him. That is a lie, I said, my voice dangerously low. A provable forensic lie. Ava sobbed louder, pulling out her phone. Ethan, Dr. Evans warned us this might happen. The paranoia, the false memories. It's the early onset progressing. She's completely disassociated from reality. Early onset, Alzheimer's. The brilliance of her counterattack hit me like a physical blow. Darvo, deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. She wasn't just defending herself. She was fundamentally rewriting reality, weaponizing my age against me. I am a forensic auditor, I snapped, standing up. Do you honestly think you can gaslight me in my own dining room? Ava had already dialed a number on her phone. She put it on speaker. It rang twice before my sister-in-law Linda answered. Hello? Ava, honey, is everything okay? Linda's voice echoed in the tense room. Aunt Linda, Ava wept, her voice trembling perfectly. I'm so sorry to call you so late. It's Angela. We're at her house. She's having some kind of episode. She's screaming at Ethan, waving papers around, claiming we stole her house. She doesn't remember taking out the loan last month. Oh dear God, Linda gasped. The doctor said the stress of the wedding might trigger a cognitive break. Hold on, Ava. Do you need me to call an ambulance? Is she violent? No, Ethan is trying to calm her down. Ava whimpered, looking me dead in the eye with a chilling, triumphant smirk that Linda couldn't see. We're just so scared, Linda. We don't know what to do. I stared at the two of them, my son standing shoulder to shoulder with the woman who was bleeding him dry, nodding along as she assassinated my sanity to my own family. If I screamed, I was a crazy old woman. If I threw them out, I was a paranoid, abusive mother. They had trapped me in a psychological corner. If I went to the police right now, Ethan and Ava would play the role of the devoted, heartbroken children dealing with a mother losing her mind. A judge might not just throw out my accusations. Ethan could easily use this episode as grounds to file for a medical conservatorship. He could take total legal control of my life, my assets, and my freedom. I had vastly underestimated the enemy. I slowly sat back down in my chair. The anger vanished, replaced by a terrifying glacial calm. You cannot win a shouting match with a sociopath. You have to play their game, on their board, until they are so confident in their victory that they don't see the guillotine dropping. I let my hands begin to shake. Real visible tremors. I let my shoulders slump, erasing the rigid posture of a federal auditor, replacing it with the fragile shell of a confused widow. Ethan? I whispered, letting my voice crack, staring blankly at the wall. Ethan, where is your father? Did he pay the catering bill? Ethan and Ava exchanged a look. Relief washed over Ethan's face. The lie was working. The threat was neutralized. Dad's gone, Mom, Ethan said softly, stepping forward and placing a heavy hand on my shoulder. It's just us. Don't worry. Ava and I are going to take over from here. We'll handle all the finances. You just need to rest. Okay, I whispered, staring at the fraudulent paperwork on the table. Okay, I'll rest. Ava ended the call with Linda. She walked over, her heels clicking on the hardwood, and gently pulled the bank statements and the deed of trust out from under my hands. "I'll just put these away so they don't upset you anymore, Mom," she cooed, sliding my evidence into her designer purse. They thought they had won. They thought they had broken my mind and stolen my claws. But as I watched them walk out of my house that night, carrying my money and my pride, they didn't realize one crucial detail. I wasn't an old woman losing her mind. I was an apex predator retreating into the tall grass, and they had just given me the exact blueprint of how to destroy them. The silence in my house the morning after that disastrous dinner was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. I sat at the kitchen island, a cold cup of coffee resting between my hands, watching the morning light crawl across the hardwood floors. The forensic auditor in me had spent decades dismantling complex webs of deceit, but nothing had prepared me for the agonizing reality of being outmaneuvered in my own dining room by my own flesh and blood. Ava had played a masterstroke. By weaponizing the very real, very terrifying specter of cognitive decline, she had completely insulated herself and Ethan from any accusations I might make. If I went to the police right now, waving printed spreadsheets and shouting about shell companies and forged mortgages, I would look exactly like the tragic, paranoid Alzheimer's patient Ava had painted me to be. Ethan, armed with his polished venture capitalist charm, would play the role of the heartbroken, dutiful son. He would file for a medical conservatorship, a legal guardianship that would strip me of my rights, freeze my assets, and place my entire life under his control. I would be locked away in an assisted living facility, drugged into compliance while they spent my life savings. Impulse is the enemy of justice. If I reacted with the fiery indignation of a betrayed mother, I would lose everything. To survive a predator, you cannot act like prey, but sometimes you must play dead. I walked into the downstairs bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back was sharp, immaculate, her posture straight. That woman had to die, at least temporarily. I needed to become the phantom Ava had conjured. I spent the next 3 days studying the enemy's narrative. I didn't just pretend to forget things. I researched the clinical presentation of early-onset dementia and acute stress-induced cognitive dissociation. I learned the nuances. It wasn't about cartoonishly forgetting my own name. It was about losing the thread of a conversation mid-sentence. It was about the subtle tremors in the hands, the vacant stare directed just slightly past the person you were speaking to, the sudden unfounded bursts of mild anxiety over trivial things. I stopped wearing my tailored blouses and pearl earrings, replacing them with oversized cardigans and mismatched socks. I stopped coloring my hair, letting the stark white roots show. I let the house get a little messy, mail piling up on the console table, a forgotten half-eaten piece of toast left on the kitchen counter. When Ethan and Ava came over the following Wednesday to check on me, the trap was baited. I was standing by the stove, staring blankly at a kettle that was already whistling, the harsh sound piercing the quiet kitchen. I didn't move to turn it off until Ethan rushed over, his face etched with a mixture of annoyance and faux concern, and killed the burner. "Mom," Ethan sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. The kettle was screaming. "How long were you standing there?" I blinked, letting my shoulders slump, and looked at him with wide, frightened eyes. "Oh, Ethan, I thought I already turned it off. I was just making tea for your father." Ethan stiffened. Ava, standing in the doorway, let out a soft, pitying sigh. But beneath the facade of the concerned future daughter-in-law, I saw it. The microscopic tightening of her lips, the subtle, triumphant gleam in her icy blue eyes. She was thrilled. The venom had taken hold. "Mom, Dad's been gone a long time," Ethan said gently, leading me by the elbow to the kitchen island. He pulled out a stool and helped me sit down, treating me like a fragile porcelain doll. I know, I muttered, pressing the heels of my hands to my temples, letting my voice waver with manufactured panic. "My head is it's so foggy lately, Ethan. I can't keep the numbers straight anymore. Everything is moving too fast. The wedding, the bank, I just feel so overwhelmed." Ava glided into the kitchen, placing a warm hand on my shoulder. The smell of her vanilla perfume made me want to retch. but I leaned into her touch, playing the role of the desperate, dependent elder. "It's okay, Mom," Ava cooed, her voice dripping with artificial honey. "You don't have to worry about the numbers anymore. Ethan and I are going to take care of everything. We want you to just focus on resting and looking beautiful for the wedding." Ethan pulled a document from his leather briefcase and laid it on the counter. "Mom, Dr. Evans suggested we take some preventative measures just to make sure your finances are protected while you're experiencing these episodes. This is a limited power of attorney. It just allows me to manage the secondary brokerage accounts and handle the remaining wedding vendor payments directly. You won't have to stress over another invoice." I looked down at the legal document. It was a blank check for my secondary portfolio, which held roughly $300,000 in liquid assets. To them, it was the ultimate victory. To me, it was the perfect bait. What Ethan didn't know was that the day before, I had quietly moved the vast majority of my real wealth, millions in government bonds and an offshore trust inherited from my father, into a blind, impenetrable trust managed by my attorney. I had left exactly $300,000 in the brokerage account. Enough to keep them greedy, enough to keep them distracted, and most importantly, enough to constitute felony grand larceny the moment they touched it. My hand shook deliberately as I picked up the pen. "You'll keep it safe, Ethan? You promise?" I whispered, looking up at him with tear-filled eyes. "I promise, Mom. I've got you," he said, and for a fraction of a second, I saw a flicker of genuine guilt cross his face. But the greed swallowed it whole. I signed the paper. The signature was intentionally messy, the letters trailing off slightly at the end. As they left that afternoon, folding the signed document into the briefcase, Ava turned back and gave me a sweet, devastating smile. "Get some sleep, Mom. We'll handle the rest." The door clicked shut. I stood in the kitchen for a full 5 minutes, listening to the sound of Ethan's car pulling out of the driveway. Then the tremor in my hands stopped. My posture straightened. The fog in my eyes evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. They had taken the bait. Now, it was time to build the cage. The next morning, I drove 3 towns over, paid cash at an electronic surplus store, and purchased state-of-the-art surveillance equipment. I wasn't going to rely on audio recordings from a smartphone that could easily be dismissed as inadmissible in court. I needed high-definition, time-stamped, undeniable proof of their malice. I spent the afternoon transforming my own home into a panopticon. I installed a micro camera inside the smoke detector in the living room, giving me a sweeping view of the seating area and the front door. Another went into the spine of a thick encyclopedia on the bookshelf in my study. The last one, a tiny lens hidden inside a decorative digital alarm clock, went directly onto my bedroom nightstand. I wired everything to a concealed, encrypted local server hidden behind a false panel in the basement utility closet, ensuring nothing was transmitted over the cloud where Ethan's tech-savvy mind might intercept it. The physical trap was set. Now I needed the digital smoking gun. My opportunity came on the following Sunday. Ava had a bridal emergency regarding her dress fitting, so Ethan came over alone to do some yard work, a performative gesture of sonly duty to keep the demented mother appeased. He left his work laptop, a sleek silver MacBook, sitting open on the kitchen island while he was outside pulling weeds in the garden. I watched him through the kitchen window. He had his AirPods in, completely engrossed in a podcast, his back to the house. I moved with the silent, practiced efficiency of a federal investigator. I slipped a bootable, encrypted USB drive from my pocket and plugged it into the side of his laptop. During my career, I had utilized forensic imaging software countless times to clone the hard drives of corrupt CEOs and cartel accountants. The software bypassed the operating system, creating a bit-by-bit replica of the physical drive, capturing everything, including deleted files, cached emails, and hidden folders. The progress bar appeared on the screen, a slow, agonizing crawl of green pixels. 12%, 34%. I kept one eye on Ethan in the yard. He wiped sweat from his brow and turned toward the house. My heart slammed against my ribs. If he walked in now, the Alzheimer's Act wouldn't save me. You don't accidentally run forensic cloning software in a state of cognitive decline. But Ethan just grabbed the garden hose and turned his back again. 89%, 98%, 100%. Image verified. I pulled the USB drive, slipped it back into my pocket, and was sitting in the armchair with a cup of tea by the time Ethan walked back inside, wiping mud from his hands. "Yard looks good, Mom," he said, oblivious to the fact that I had just captured his entire digital soul. That night, in the safety of my study, with the blinds drawn and the hidden server humming quietly in the basement, I decrypted the cloned drive. What I found was a descent into a financial hellscape. Ethan's venture capital firm wasn't just failing, it was a Ponzi scheme on the verge of collapse. He had taken millions from private investors and lost it in highly leveraged, catastrophic cryptocurrency trades. The emails were frantic, desperate pleas for more time, mixed with thinly veiled threats of legal action from his clients. But the most damning evidence wasn't the failing business. It was a hidden folder titled Maldives Itinerary. I opened the folder. It didn't contain brochures for overwater bungalows or snorkeling excursions. It contained scanned copies of 2 newly expedited passports, wire transfer confirmations to an offshore banking institution in the Cayman Islands, and one-way first-class tickets departing from Los Angeles International Airport to Malé, Maldives, scheduled for the night of the wedding. The Maldives, a country that famously does not have a formal extradition treaty with the United States. It wasn't a honeymoon. It was an extraction. Ethan and Ava weren't planning to come back. They were going to liquidate my $300,000, combine it with the $150,000 they had stolen via the forged mortgage, and vanish into the Indian Ocean, leaving me destitute, legally declared incompetent, and facing the wrath of Ethan's defrauded investors. The sheer, breathtaking cruelty of it almost broke me. My son was going to leave me to rot, but the auditor in me took over, compartmentalizing the grief, turning the pain into cold, actionable data. I printed every email, every wire transfer, and every fake invoice. I compiled them into meticulously indexed binders. Then I reviewed the hidden camera footage from the past week. I hit the jackpot on a Tuesday afternoon. Ava had come over while I was supposedly napping upstairs. The living room camera captured her sitting on the sofa, talking on the phone with someone I assumed was her mother back in Ohio. "I know, Mom, it's exhausting." Ava's voice echoed clearly through my headphones, her tone devoid of the sweet, breathy affectation she usually wore. "But it's almost done. The old bat actually signed the POA yesterday. She's playing right into the dementia narrative. Ethan is transferring the funds on Friday. As soon as the reception is over, we are gone. She won't even realize she's broke until we're halfway across the world." A chilling laugh escaped Ava's lips. "Honestly, it's pathetic. She thinks we actually care about the centerpieces." I stopped the recording. I had the motive. I had the method. I had the confession. It was time to bring in the heavy artillery. On Thursday, 2 days before the wedding, I drove to an inconspicuous beige office building in downtown Los Angeles. I walked into the conference room of my longtime attorney, Margaret Chen. Sitting at the table next to Margaret was Marcus Thorne, the private investigator, and a man I recognized from my old days at the Bureau, Special Agent David Vance from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, IRS-CI, accompanied by a federal prosecutor. I didn't walk in as a frail, confused widow. I walked in with my spine straight, wearing my tailored suit, carrying 3 thick binders and a secure hard drive. "Gentlemen, Margaret," I said, taking my seat at the head of the table. "I apologize for the urgency, but we have a flight risk." For the next 4 hours, I laid out the case. I walked them through the forged deed of trust, tracing the notary stamp back to Ethan's firm. I showed them the shell company in Delaware, the routing numbers connecting it to Ava's hometown credit union, and the ultimate destination of the funds in the Cayman Islands. Finally, I played the audio and video footage of Ava confessing to the entire scheme in my living room. The federal prosecutor, a hard-nosed woman who had put away cartel bosses, looked at the evidence with wide eyes. "This is," Unprecedentedly thorough, Mrs. Turner. You've essentially done our entire financial forensic investigation for us. I used to write the manuals you train your agents with, I replied coldly. Now here is the timeline. The wire transfers are scheduled to execute at 5 p.m. on Saturday, precisely when the wedding reception begins. The flight to the Maldives departs at 11:30 p.m. I do not want them arrested at the airport. I want them arrested at the venue. Margaret frowned slightly. I yelled. Angela, a public arrest at the wedding? The media fallout? The humiliation? Are you sure you want to subject yourself to that? I looked at my attorney, the ghosts of the past few months hardening my resolve. They had tried to steal my home. They had tried to erase my sanity. They had planned to leave me to die in a state-run facility while they drank champagne on a stolen beach. They built a stage to celebrate their victory, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet echoing off the glass walls of the conference room. It is only fitting that we use it for their execution. I want the IRS, the FBI, and the local police waiting in the wings. When I give the signal, you bring the house down. Special Agent Vance nodded slowly, a grim smile touching his lips. Wire fraud, bank fraud, forgery, grand larceny, and conspiracy to commit all of the above. By the time we're done with them, they won't see the outside of a federal penitentiary until they're gray. Good, I said, closing the binder with a sharp, definitive snap. I drove home that evening as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in strokes of bruised purple and violent red. My house was empty, quiet, and perfectly still. I walked into the hallway and looked at the framed photograph of Ethan on his college graduation day. He was smiling, his arm wrapped around my shoulders, a boy with the whole world ahead of him. I took the photograph off the wall, walked into the kitchen, and dropped it into the trash can. Tomorrow was the rehearsal dinner. The day after was the wedding. I had played the victim flawlessly. I had let them believe they were the apex predators in the room. But as I laid out my navy blue mother-of-the-groom dress for the final time, I knew the truth. The trap was primed. The cage was locked. All that was left was to let the rats walk in. The grand ballroom of the coastal luxury resort was a masterpiece of manufactured romance. Thousands of white roses cascaded from crystal chandeliers, catching the dim amber lighting and casting soft shadows against the silk-draped walls. A string quartet played a classical rendition of a modern pop song in the corner. Waiters in pristine white coats glided between the tables, pouring endless streams of expensive champagne into crystal flutes. It was breathtaking. It was perfect. And it was entirely funded by felony fraud. I sat at the head table, flanked by my brother's family on one side and a parade of Ava's Midwestern relatives on the other. I wore the navy blue dress. I kept my shoulders hunched, my hands resting in my lap with a meticulously practiced slight tremor. Every few minutes, Ava's mother would lean over and offer me a patronizing, sympathetic smile, entirely convinced by the narrative her daughter had spun. Poor Angela, her eyes seemed to say, losing her mind just as her son gains a wife. In the center of the room, on a slightly elevated dais, sat the king and queen of the evening, Ethan and Ava. Ethan looked handsome in a custom-tailored Tom Ford tuxedo, though the dark circles under his eyes betrayed the crushing weight of his collapsing Ponzi scheme. But Ava was radiant. She wore a bespoke, hand-beaded Vera Wang gown that easily cost $15,000, purchased no doubt from the stolen equity of my home. She laughed. She kissed Ethan's cheek. She raised her glass to the flashing cameras. She looked like a woman who had just successfully pulled off the heist of the century, and in her mind, she had. By 5 p.m., the exact moment the waiters began clearing the dinner plates, cheap, rubbery chicken masquerading as a gourmet dish, another testament to Ava's embezzlement, I knew the wire transfers to the Cayman Islands had been initiated by Ethan's automated banking protocols. The money was moving. The crime was no longer just an intention. It was a completed, federally prosecutable act. The clinking of a spoon against a crystal glass rang through the ballroom, the chatter of 200 guests. Guests died down. Ava's maid of honor, a bubbly blonde who was completely oblivious to the criminal enterprise she was standing in, gave a tearful generic speech about soulmates. Then the best man gave a toast, drawing chuckles from Ethan's fraternity brothers. Finally, the master of ceremonies took the microphone. And now we have a very special moment. The groom's mother, Mrs. Angela Turner, would like to say a few words. Ava leaned toward the microphone on the sweetheart table, her voice dripping with artificial cloying sweetness. Everyone, please be patient. Mom has been struggling with her health lately, and she's very tired, but she insisted on speaking. We love you so much, Mom. A collective murmur of sympathy washed over the crowd. Ethan looked at me with a tight, nervous smile, clearly hoping I wouldn't embarrass him. I gripped the edge of the table and stood up slowly. I let my hands shake visibly as I took the microphone from the MC. I walked to the center of the dance floor, standing directly beneath the largest chandelier. The spotlight hit me, blinding and hot. I looked at Ethan. I looked at Ava. And then I let the tremor stop. I rolled my shoulders back. I straightened my spine, shedding the posture of a frail, confused widow like a cheap winter coat. I lifted my chin, and the energy in the room instantly shifted. The sympathetic murmurs died in the throats of the guests. My eyes locked onto Ava's, and for the first time that evening, the triumphant smile on her face faltered. "Good evening," I said. My voice did not shake. It resonated through the high-end sound system, crisp, authoritative, and terrifyingly calm. It was the voice of a federal investigator stepping into an interrogation room. "Weddings are a time for storytelling," I began, pacing slowly across the polished wood of the dance floor. "We tell stories of how the couple met. We tell stories of romance, of destiny. But tonight, I want to tell you a different kind of story. A fairy tale, if you will. It's a story about a golden cage." Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Ava's hands tightened around her champagne flute, her knuckles turning white. "Once upon a time," I continued, "there was a mother who spent her entire life building a beautiful, secure golden cage for her son. She worked 60-hour weeks. She gave up her own dreams, her own comfort, to ensure that the cage was lined with the finest silk, that its bars were unbreakable, that the boy inside would never know the harshness of the outside world. She gave him the best education, a debt-free start to life, and a quiet, safe home to return to." I paused, letting the silence stretch until it became heavy and suffocating. The guests were completely still, sensing that this was no ordinary toast. "But the boy grew up," I said, my voice dropping an octave, echoing with a chilling edge. "And he brought a new bird into the cage, a beautiful bird with bright feathers and a sweet song. The mother was thrilled. She offered them everything. She even gave them $80,000 to celebrate their union." I turned slowly, pointing a perfectly manicured finger directly at the sweetheart table. But the new bird didn't just want the cage. She wanted the gold it was made of. And the son, the boy who had been given everything, decided that the mother was no longer necessary. So together, they decided to sell the cage, with the mother still inside it. "Mom," Ethan said. "Ed," his voice cracking through the dead silence of the room. He stood up, panic bleeding into his handsome features. "Mom, you're confused." "Please, let's sit down." "I am not confused, Ethan," I snapped, the sheer force of my tone pinning him back into his chair. "I have never been clearer in my entire life." I reached into the pocket of my dress and pulled out a small black remote control. I pointed it at the AV booth in the back of the room, where a technician, a young man I had paid $3,000 in cash earlier that afternoon, gave me a subtle nod. "I am a retired forensic auditor for the United States government," I announced to the room, "and I would like to present my wedding gift." I pressed the button on the remote. The massive projector screen behind the sweetheart table, which had been displaying a looping video of Ethan and Ava walking on a beach, suddenly went black. A second later, a high-definition unredacted bank statement flashed onto the screen, 10 feet tall. "This," I said, my voice ringing with cold, absolute authority, "is the routing trace for $40,000 of my money, wired to a shell company in Delaware called Dream Vows LLC, a company solely registered to the bride, Ava Marie Hayes. A collective gasp ripped through the ballroom. Ava's mother let out a sharp cry. I pressed the button again. The screen changed. It was the deed of trust for the second mortgage on my house. This is a federal banking document, a $150,000 home equity line of credit, taken out against my fully paid home. I zoomed in on the signature line. Forged by my son, Ethan Turner, and illegally notarized by an employee at his failing venture capital firm to cover up millions in fraudulent cryptocurrency losses. "Shut it off!" Ethan screamed, his face turning a violent shade of crimson. He lunged across the table, knocking over a crystal vase. White roses and water spilled across the silk tablecloth. "Turn that screen off right now." "Are you having an episode, Ethan?" I asked sweetly, throwing Ava's own psychological warfare right back in their faces. "Are you feeling paranoid? Disassociated from reality?" Ava was no longer playing the sweet bride. The mask was completely gone, replaced by the cornered feral panic of a trapped animal. She grabbed Ethan's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his tuxedo jacket. "Ethan, we have to go. Now," she hissed, though her microphone was still on, broadcasting her panic to the entire stunned room. "The car is out back. We have the flight. Let's go." She was referring to the 11:30 p.m. first-class departure out of LAX, the extraction plan. I let out a low, dark laugh. It echoed through the speakers, freezing them both in their tracks as they tried to scramble off the dais. "Are you looking for these, Ava?" I pressed the button a third time. The screen flashed to a screenshot of an email from Emirates Airlines. Cancellation confirmed. Flight 215 to Malé, Maldives. "I intercepted the offshore wire transfer at 5:01 p.m., I said, stepping closer to them, my eyes locked onto my son's terrified face. "The money didn't go to the Cayman Islands, Ethan. It was routed into a holding account managed by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Your passports have been flagged by the TSA. There is no flight. There is no beach. There is nowhere left to run." Ethan staggered back as if he had been physically struck. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a horrific realization. The old, frail woman he thought he had outsmarted, the mother he thought he had broken, had meticulously built a gallows right under his feet, and he had just tied his own noose. You knew?" Ethan breathed, his voice trembling. "The dementia? The power of attorney? You faked it?" "I gave you enough rope to hang yourselves," I said coldly. "And you both pulled the lever." Ava, realizing the ship was sinking, instantly turned on her co-conspirator. She shoved Ethan away from her, her face twisting into an ugly mask of betrayal. "This was your idea," she shrieked at him, pointing a trembling finger. "You told me the firm was going under. You told me she was a rich old bat who wouldn't notice the mortgage. I'm just a victim." "A victim?" Ethan roared back, completely losing his mind as the crowd watched the glamorous couple tear each other apart. "You drained your first husband dry, Ava. I saw the background check my mother left on the table. You set up the Delaware company. You planned the extraction." "That's enough." The voice didn't come from me. It came from the back of the ballroom. The heavy mahogany double doors of the banquet hall swung open violently, hitting the walls with a resounding crack. A dozen men and women in dark suits and tactical vests stepped into the amber light of the ballroom. At the front of the formation was Special Agent David Vance of the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, flanked by 3 armed FBI agents. The gold shields on their belts caught the light of the chandeliers. The string quartet had stopped playing long ago. The only sound in the room was the heavy, synchronized thud of federal boots marching across the hardwood floor, parting the sea of terrified, silent wedding guests. Ethan collapsed to his knees right there on the dais. He buried his face in his hands, letting out a gut-wrenching sob, the realization of his ruined life finally crashing down upon him. Ava didn't cry. She tried to run. She picked up the heavy skirts of her $15,000 Vera Wang gown and bolted toward the kitchen service doors. She made it exactly 5 steps before a female FBI agent intercepted her, grabbing her arm and spinning her around. "Ava Marie Hayes," the agent said, her voice sharp and devoid of emotion. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and grand larceny." "Get off me!" Ava screamed, thrashing wildly, her perfect blonde updo falling into a messy, tangled wreck around her face. "I didn't do anything. He forced me. He's abusive." Special Agent Vance stepped onto the dais and looked down at Ethan. "Ethan Turner, you are under arrest for bank fraud, forgery of a federal document, and wire fraud. Put your hands behind your back." As the cuffs clicked shut around Ethan's wrists, he looked up at me. His face was stained with tears, his eyes begging for the one thing he had always relied on, his mother's unconditional forgiveness. "Mom," he choked out, his voice a pathetic, broken whisper as the agents hauled him to his feet. "Mom, please, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Don't let them take me. I'm your son." I looked at the boy I had raised. I thought about the decades of love, the late nights, the sacrifices, the pride I had felt when he graduated. I thought about the joint bank account, the forged signature, the fake Alzheimer's diagnosis, and the one-way ticket to the Maldives. The love of a mother is infinite, but it is not blind, and it is not a shield for monsters. "My son died the day he forged my name and tried to steal my mind," I said quietly, the words cutting through the air like glass. "I don't know who you are. Take him away." Ethan let out a wail of absolute despair as the agents marched him down the aisle, the same aisle he had walked down just hours earlier in triumph. Ava was dragged out kicking and screaming, her designer dress tearing on the corner of a table, the pearls scattering across the floor like tiny broken teeth. The federal agents filed out, leaving behind a ballroom frozen in shock. 200 guests stood in dead silence, staring at the wreckage of the perfect American wedding. I didn't stay to answer questions. I didn't stay to listen to the apologies of Ava's family or the shocked murmurs of my own. My work was done. I set the microphone down on the nearest table. I picked up my beaded clutch, turned my back on the grand, glittering room, and walked out the side exit. The California night air hit my face, cool, crisp, and beautifully clean. The valet brought my car around. As I slipped into the leather driver's seat, I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. I was 62 years old. I had no husband. I had no son. I had no family left to speak of. But as I started the engine and drove away from the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers gathered at the resort's entrance, I didn't feel empty. I felt completely, utterly free. I pressed my foot on the accelerator, driving down the Pacific Coast Highway, leaving the ghosts, the liars, and the golden cage far behind me in the dark.